Hi guys, welcome back to the One Take Show, a podcast where we celebrate incredible conversation with some phenomenal people. And with this principle of incredible conversation, I bring to you an episode featuring Mr. Anuj Desai. Sir is a UK-based lawyer who also hosts a wonderful podcast, the Cannabis Conversations, where we have some of the most incredible guests talking about various aspects of cannabis industry. In this episode, we will talk about the emerging legal industry in the world of cannabis. There is a potential $300 billion industry that is finding its niche in the world market, and it is important for law students in India as well to understand how this industry is perhaps evolving and what all opportunities are opening up. If you like this episode, make sure you like, share and subscribe to the channel. If you have any suggestions and feedbacks, write them down in the comment section or reach out to me. I would love it either way. Hence, ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's jump right in. All right, we are recording. Welcome to the One Take Show, sir. I am so excited to speak to you. I have been following the Cannabis Conversations ever since I discovered podcasts as a field which can actually provide us with the knowledge that we, especially in law students, need for their career growths and everything. Thank you so much for taking time off your really busy schedule and sitting down with me for this conversation.
Real pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Perfect. So before we get into all the conversations that we have planned, let me just say it out loud, I am a huge fan of your podcast, primarily because it is so unique and it provides us with the conversations with some of the most leading figures in the industry who have given us insights that has added a tremendous amount of value to, I think, every listener who tunes into your podcast. If I may ask you, what was your journey like, especially because your website says that you're a lawyer by trade, but you find great interest in cannabis conversations and you have somehow transformed into this industry. So what inspired you to, first of all, get into law and practicing for so many years and now this transformation? A little bit about that.
Sure. Wow, there's quite a lot there. I guess I started law. I did my undergraduate in economics and history, and I left university and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, to be honest. So I did a load of kind of jobs that just to make a bit of money, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do longer term. And then I started working with a company lawyer at the place that I was working at the time, and a few of my friends were starting to do law conversion courses, so to sort of begin the training to be a lawyer. And I just learned more about it, and I thought, okay, this sounds quite interesting. I come from an Indian background, so obviously, you know what Indian parents are like. They, I disappointed them first by not wanting to be a doctor, so I had to come up with something else. But I kind of liked what I was hearing about law, and actually, I didn't really know about commercial law. I knew about going into court and doing the things that most people associate with it, but the commercial and the corporate side of things, I learned more about through being in business, and I realized that was a good place to go. So I decided to do the law conversion course, which is in the UK, you don't have to do an undergraduate in law. You can do a small course after you do your undergraduate to convert to doing law. So during that time, I got a paralegal position with Universal Pictures, the big studio, and it was then that I realized actually maybe media law is where I want to go, and so I applied for training contracts, which is a bit like a pupillage, whilst I was doing that, and I joined a big media law firm on after I finished my studies, and then it kind of put me on a track to sort of work in media and film and TV, which I did for a good 10-12 years. Before, and I actually only worked in a law firm for a couple of years. I moved straight in-house on qualification, which I'm really glad. I enjoyed that a lot more. It's a different challenge, I think, to working in private practice, and it suited me because I really wanted to understand how businesses work, and so I really wanted to sort of be in there and kind of dealing with lots of different types of people. So that's how I got into law.
Perfect. I'm happy to actually follow up on two different points. Firstly, I'm really happy to know that the disappointment in Indian parents run beyond boundaries. And the second is that I actually had never have had any guest who has worked so closely with media law. So if you don't mind me asking, how was your experience working with media law? And it's like, since you've already had a taste with commercial law, I think you've mentioned. So is there a huge difference with respect to the industry engagements and how the media law works, or how the industry for media law works?
So, I mean, look, majority of stuff I've done is in media. So, it's difficult to compare it to, say, someone working in an oil company, etc. But what I would think is that working with creatives is quite a challenge for a lawyer, basically, because you kind of speak two different languages, and so understanding where they're trying to go, and more importantly, getting them to understand what you're trying to protect is quite a challenge. And it can be fun and interesting, but it also can be a bit, maddening at the same time. So you're dealing with rights and copyrights, and the whole creative process is quite an interesting one as well. So understanding how film and TV productions are put together, and then how they're distributed, and also how they're financed as well, which is quite unique. It's quite a specialized sector, so it's really enjoyable, but you have a few crazy moments during that.
And then how did this transformation happen? Like you mentioned that your transformation from perhaps legal industry to moving towards cannabis, and understanding that it is perhaps becoming a potential $300 billion industry in the future. You say that cannabis is being looked at one of the most like an industry that is being sought after in US, in Canada, and also catching some sort of traction in UK and European countries as well. So how did this transformation happen? What was that, perhaps any experience that would have inspired you to move towards this direction?
Sure. So, look, from a career perspective, one of the benefits of working as an in-house lawyer was that I got to work with entrepreneurs and commercial people, and I really enjoyed understanding how businesses work. And actually, my career was moving towards a more commercial role. So I had transitioned from being a lawyer to a kind of commercial lead, where I was still dealing with contracts, but I wasn't negotiating them. And so I was already in that direction. And then I kind of looked around and I realized I didn't necessarily want to be in the film and TV sector for the rest of my career. And so I started to get some entrepreneurial ideas, and I found a business idea that I started with a friend. And I quit my day job, and I became a kind of freelance consultant as a lawyer. But at the same time, I started a health and fitness business with a friend of mine. And it was a brilliant experience, and I loved it. I loved the whole craziness of starting something new and learning a lot. And the business didn't work out long term, but it convinced me that I didn't want to go back to the corporate world, and I wanted to figure out a different route. So I had about 2 or 3 years of just kissing a lot of frogs, basically trying out lots of things that didn't work, and working with lots of small businesses and advising and doing kind of really random stuff. And then I kind of stumbled upon this new cannabis industry that an ex-colleague of mine who's quite prominent in the space in the UK, he invited me to a conference, and I went, and I learned much more about the medical side of things. So I heard from patients who had epilepsy or cancer or MS, and they were using cannabis to either treat their condition or ease their symptoms, and it was having a fantastic impact on their lives. And I just started to read everything I could about it, and I realized that not only is it an amazing medicine, but also growing cannabis and hemp is very good for the environment, because it sequesters more CO2 than a lot of other plants. So it can be carbon negative in a lot of ways.
Oh, wow. I mean, I am so unaware about so many of these facts, primarily because I think in India, cannabis is still sort of an anathema. There is So the environment in general is absolutely not conducive. So that's a given. But even if there is a consumption, although illegal, there is a very little information dissemination. There is a lack of knowledge, perhaps awareness about the industry. If we perhaps not even talk about cannabis as a medicinal properties of the cannabis, or perhaps for the recreational use, there is almost no awareness amongst perhaps youngsters or the people who consume. So when we see these, there is a difference, or there is this gap between the sort of industrial engagement with people who live in countries like UK or Europe. How could you like perhaps tell me a little bit about this industry of cannabis, and where is this industry going really?
Wow. Yeah. Look, it's huge. Basically, the cannabis plant, and hemp is a legal definition for a type of cannabis, but there are over 10,000 different uses for it, and it's quite crazy. And it's quite funny that you say that about India, because historically, cannabis has been part of Indian culture and part of Ayurvedic traditions. And a bit of a plug for my own podcast, but I did a episode with a couple of guys from the Bombay Hemp Company, who are fantastic, super smart guys, and they're doing some brilliant stuff. And we talked a lot about how cannabis has a real kind of close tie to Indian culture historically, and it's really a very modern thing that it's been demonized and stigmatized in the way that it has. And that's mainly come from the US because of basically quite racist policy for criminalizing drug use that began in the 1930s. And so a lot of what's happened in the last 80 years has been basically suppressing anything that was sort of useful around these plants, and basically creating this image that it's it's just bad. Whereas prior to 1930, cannabis oil was very, very widely used across the world as a medicine. So there's rumors that Queen Victoria used it herself. It was very kind of regularly seen on most people's kind of bathroom shelves, being used as for a number of things, from pain to sleep to various different things. But the problem is that given the last 80 years has been a period of prohibition, there's been very little study on cannabis. So that's only just starting to happen now, and there's still a lot to learn. But if you talk about the plant and what it does when you ingest it, there's lots of different medical uses. Pain is one that I mentioned, and it's antispasmodic, so it's been used for epilepsy. It can be used topically on your skin for dermatological uses, and loads more stuff that they're looking at, including as an anti-cancer drug. It's quite easy to get overexcited, but there is still a lot of research that needs to be done. But there are some really promising signs, and there are some great people in Israel and in the US and Canada and in various places that are studying some amazing things. But then there's also, and this is a bit more applicable to India, is the textile side of things. So the fibers of the plant are very strong and can be used for a number of different things. So they are used in fabrics, but they can also be used in industrial materials, and they're also looking at extracting cellulose from hemp and using it as part of bioplastics. Also, it can be used as fuel, and it can be used in batteries. There's crazy stuff that goes on. Henry Ford actually, in the 1930s, I think, he made a car completely from hemp, and also that was powered by hemp fuel. So people were looking at this, and then it, for very political reasons, it got sidetracked.
I think this puts me in a position where I have to question everything about cannabis or anything about this entire industry that we have been taught, or sort of the conversations that we have grown up with, because we've always been told that this is a drug, has been treated like a drug, which can only be used for recreation, and that recreation will necessarily lead to detrimental effects on health and will lead to addiction. Although over time we have realized that there are different reports suggesting different things, and I would just like to sort of follow up on something that you mentioned. You say that there is a sort of a racist angle to why cannabis is being treated or stigmatized the way it is. What we have read is that it has something to do with the pharmaceutical companies and whatnot, conspiracy theories that keep revolving around it. But when we talk about the engagement of this industry, what are the possibilities of, like, as far as the true essence of the potential that this industry might hold, especially when we look at, let's say, law and the legal industry with in relation with cannabis? How do you see that industry evolving in this sphere?
Wow. Let me see. Where do I start here? So, look, if I talk about the racist angle, one of the things. So, in the 1930s, there was a guy called Harry Anslinger in the US who was a big proponent of making cannabis illegal because it wasn't at the time, right?
Okay.
And actually, there were lots of people farming hemp and cannabis in the United States. And in fact, during the Second World War, the government was encouraging people to farm hemp as part of the war effort. But this guy wanted to kind of outlaw it for reasons, and he used very racist reasons. He said, you know, to paraphrase what he said essentially, cannabis is smoked by Hispanics, Negroes, and entertainers, jazz musicians. And he said the jazz musicians play their music, and white women smoke the cannabis, and they want to have sex with Negroes. And that was the public statement. This is what their reasoning was to change the law. So it was very, very racist, and it's basically been seen as a tool that you can easily arrest people. So the US by far incarcerates more people than anywhere else in the world, and a vastly disproportionate amount of those people are black. And so it's been seen as another tool that you can easily take away someone's freedom by just, finding weed on them and then putting them in prison. And the sentences that some of these people are getting are totally disproportionate, 60 years in jail for having a joint on you, these sort of things. And it's a huge waste of money and lives and all of those sort of things. So if I take it back to where I am in the UK, some of the biggest proponents of changing the law are the police, basically. Okay. Because the police have limited resources, and they're all saying, we would rather tackle violent crime than be wasting time on putting teenagers in prison for having a joint. Okay. And that's a simplification of it, but if you're supplying and you're dealing and you're very high up the criminal food chain, then absolutely those guys need to be dealt with. But if you're kind of criminalizing young people at the very beginning of their lives, really, it's a very dangerous kind of path. And the resources that you would free up by not doing that could be huge.
Right. And this, I think, opens up a lot of opportunities for, let's say, a conversation about this issue, because this is perhaps involving different sections of the society. How do you see when we say lawyers getting engaged in this, as how did you get engaged in this industry? Is there possibilities for legal consultation or sort of that, any such possibilities opening up for legal industry to be involved in cannabis industry?
Yeah, so look, I'm a commercial lawyer, so I do sort of commercial work for businesses in this space, and that's primarily medical cannabis or CBD companies. And effectively, I could be representing any company. It just so happens that I'm choosing this sector to focus on. Right. But if you're talking about specialism, there's a real need for regulatory lawyers, because there's a lot of regulations around this, and they're constantly changing. So, understand people that understand that language of regulation and real kind of dense legislation, and also international treaties and how you operate licenses, that's very important. And there will be a lot of work there, because each country is making their own rules. So the ability to interpret these rules and how they intersect is very important.
Right. Well, I think I personally have been exposed to sort of a new set of knowledge, which will obviously encourage me to look forward to all the possibilities that there are in this industry. But before we somehow wrap this conversation up, I have to ask you this. what exactly was your principle behind the Cannabis Conversations? Because I'm really excited to know about what inspired you to perhaps start this podcast, and what is it that you are intending on conveying through this podcast to your listeners?
Well, yeah. So look, I when I was looking at the industry, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and
Mhm.
um, there was a lot of different opportunities, but I couldn't figure it out. So no one was really doing a podcast in Europe. There's plenty of podcasts now, and there are
Mhm.
plenty of podcasts in North America. But when I started, no one was really doing it in Europe very much. So I thought there was an opportunity to do something there. But it's actually, from a personal development perspective, it's the first thing that I've ever done with no outcome in mind,
Mhm.
and that's been brilliant because it meant that I had no preconceptions of what it might deliver,
Okay.
and I had a lot of freedom. What I really wanted to achieve was I wanted to learn more. I wanted to build my network of kind of people across the world and thought leaders. And I also wanted to help people understand more about it. And actually, it's changed during the time I was doing it. So originally, I quite wanted to do it to teach the world about cannabis. And
Okay.
where it's ended up going is it's actually become more of an industry focus. So
Mhm.
it's very much for people in the industry or people who want to get into the industry. So to get them to understand a bit about the science, a bit about who's investing, what are the trends, what's the legislation, regulation, what's the various different aspects of it. And so hopefully it's quite useful for people working in the industry.
Right. Right.
Well, can I ask what was your motivation for starting your podcast?
Mine was quite, it was very on the nose. The pandemic all started, and I realized that as a law student, it's really important for me to connect with as many leaders and luminaries in the field, the respective fields, especially related with law, and to have a conversation with them, because there is sort of a culture with law students that there's a gap between the leaders and perhaps the senior advocates or the partners in the law firms, and the other professionals who are doing something really interesting or creative in their own fields. There is a gap. There's lack of conversation. So I thought perhaps I can do that. I can reach out to these leaders, have that conversation, and meanwhile I'm having that conversation, why not record it and produce it on YouTube? So
Very good idea. I've
and
honestly, it's one of the best things I've ever done. So I'm glad that you're doing it too.
But I have to ask you a rather very selfish question. Is that when you were having, like, when you record all these podcasts, when you have all these questions and you have those conversations, what are those key factors that you keep in mind that help you with the production of your podcast, or perhaps taking your podcast to a different level?
I try not to talk as much as possible. I try and get my guests to talk. Um, and look, the reason I called it a conversation is because I wanted it to be kind of relaxed and a bit organic, and so I try and focus on it being that. And conversations aren't perfect, all right, and you can't rehearse them, etc. So you get comfortable with the fact that you might get things a little bit wrong, or it might not be exactly how you intended it. But as long as the general vibe is to sort of learn from each other and highlight stuff, I think that's a good way to go about it.
Perfect, perfect. That is absolutely the number one thing that I'd need to work on to perhaps stop speaking so much on my own podcasts. But truly an inspirational episode, because I have been looking forward to this conversation for a really, really long time, and I think this conversation will help so many law students, will add value and perspective to so many other listeners who will tune into this episode. I am truly, truly grateful for this opportunity. I had a wonderful time. Do you have any closing remarks for our listeners?
No, well, thank you, Costa, for inviting me on. Really nice to be a guest for once, and get to talk about these things. So, no,
Mhm.
thank you for having me, and all the best with it in the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for this opportunity.
Take care.